It began in the middle of a celebration. A Friday night in late September, in the suburbs of Denver. The living room of a rented house pulsed with music. Strings of cheap LED lights blinked along the walls, and the air smelled of beer, perfume, and the sugary edge of spiked punch. 23-year-old Emily Hartman was in the center of it all. She was laughing, swaying to the beat, her hair damp with sweat, cheeks flushed pink. Friends would later say she seemed perfectly fine. She wasn't drunk, not really, a little tipsy, but still in control. She was teasing one of her classmates about his dancing when it happened. At first, no one noticed. Her knees buckled, and she laughed as though she'd tripped on her shoes. But then her body went stiff. Her red plastic cup slipped from her hand, splashing punch across the carpet. And with a sound like air leaving a balloon, Emily collapsed, face first, onto the floor. The music kept playing. People shouted, half annoyed, half concerned. Someone muttered, "Too much tequila." Another voice joked, "Lightweight." But when they rolled her over, the laughter stopped. Emily's skin was clammy. Her lips had taken on a strange bluish tint. And when her best friend Megan tried to shake her awake, her eyes fluttered in a way that didn't look like drunkenness. It looked like she was short-circuiting. That was the moment the panic began. A girl at the party remembers it vividly. She just dropped. We thought she fainted, or maybe she was on something. But her skin, it was sweaty, wet, and she wasn't waking up. I remember thinking, this isn't alcohol. This is something worse. They called 911. While they waited, Emily groaned. Not words, but guttural, distorted sounds. Her body twitched, arms pulling toward her chest, fingers clawing at the air. One girl whispered the word seizure. Another whispered something else, something darker. Possession. And then the rash appeared. It started as a patch of redness on her neck, creeping outward like spilled ink. By the time paramedics burst through the door, Emily's chest and arms were mottled with angry blotches, her pulse weak, her blood pressure dangerously low. The party had become a nightmare. Inside the ambulance, Emily opened her eyes, but she didn't seem to see. She muttered fragments, words that didn't connect, syllables mashed together. Nurses later described her as delirious, like a fever dream walking. She kept grabbing at the oxygen mask, insisting she didn't need it, insisting she was fine. Her skin told a different story. It was the color of ash. By the time she arrived at the emergency department, she was in full shock. Her body was shutting down. Doctors swarmed her. To them, this was a medical puzzle with a ticking clock. Her vitals were unstable, her temperature spiking to 104. The rash spread across her torso, blotchy and purplish. The first thought was meningitis, a life-threatening infection that can kill within hours. Her stiff neck, fever, and rash all fit the picture. Broad-spectrum antibiotics were pushed into her fore. But there were other possibilities. Could it have been drug overdose? Party setting, young woman, sudden collapse. They tested for opioids, amphetamines, cocaine. Nothing. Could it have been poisoning? The punch bowl was eyed suspiciously. Someone whispered about spiked drinks. Or was it something else entirely? Emily's body betrayed her minute by minute. The rash darkened. Her hands turned a mottled purple. When nurses tried to place a second for, they struggled. Her veins were collapsing. Her blood pressure dipped so low that monitors screamed. And then came the hallucinations. She began speaking again, but the words chilled the staff. There are bugs in my skin. They're crawling inside me. Please get them out. Please. Her voice was hoarse, panicked. She scratched at her chest until her skin broke, smearing blood across her hospital gown. Doctors restrained her, terrified of the damage she could do to herself. The overhead lights flickered as if on cue. Some of the younger nurses would later admit that, in that moment, it didn't feel like medicine. Felt like a haunting. The search for answers continued. Her spinal tap came back negative for meningitis. Toxicology was negative for drugs. Blood tests showed alarming levels of organ stress, kidneys failing, liver enzymes climbing, lactic acid surging. She was, in effect, rotting alive from the inside out. But why? Her friend Megan told investigators. They asked us over and over, did she take anything? Did she eat something weird? Did she have a condition? We kept saying no. She was fine. She was healthy. She just wasn't anymore. Doctors ordered more tests. They suspected sepsis, a body-wide infection. But from where? No wounds, no recent surgeries. Emily was young, athletic, no underlying health issues. She wasn't supposed to die like this. And yet, as the night went on, death seemed certain. Her blood pressure fell again. Her oxygen dropped. Her heart began to slow. The medical team shocked her back, pumped her with fluids, pressed vasopressors into her veins to squeeze her vessels tight enough to keep blood moving. For a few minutes, she seemed stable. But then another wave hit. Her skin erupted in fresh patches of crimson, and she seized violently. The monitors shrieked. Staff shouted. And in the chaos, the same thought crossed every mind in the room. What is happening to her? The emergency department at St. Luke's was designed for chaos, but this was different. Around Emily's bed, the atmosphere wasn't just urgent, it was uncanny. Doctors exchanged looks they rarely allowed families to see. Something was wrong in a way they couldn't yet name. Emily's body kept collapsing. The rash had spread down her legs, turning them blotchy, almost bruised. Her temperature climbed to 105 despite ice packs and cooling blankets. Her blood pressure was nearly undetectable, and her mind slipped further into delirium. She whispered in a sing-song voice, as though reciting a nursery rhyme. 1, 2. They're coming for you. 3, 4. Don't trust the door. A nurse shivered, later admitting it sounded rehearsed, ritualistic. Emily wasn't a psychiatric patient. She was a college student. Yet here she was, muttering like something inside her brain had been rewired. She was transferred to the ICU. By then her kidneys had begun shutting down. Her liver numbers spiked. Platelets plummeted, leaving her prone to bleeding. Doctors whispered the same word again and again. Sepsis. But sepsis needs a source. A wound, pneumonia, an abscess. Emily had none. Her chest X-ray was clear. Her abdomen normal. Her skin, though mottled, showed no injury. It was as if the infection had materialized out of thin air. One of the doctors later admitted, "We ran everything, cultures, scans, tox screens. Nothing explained it." Young woman, previously healthy, suddenly in full-blown shock. I kept thinking, what are we missing? In the waiting room, her friends sat wide-eyed, still in their party clothes. Megan replayed the night for detectives who now wondered if this was poisoning. No one had seen her take anything unusual. No one had noticed her complaining of illness before the collapse. It was as if a trapdoor had opened beneath her body and pulled her straight into hell. Some whispered again about curses. Others swore her eyes rolled back in a way that wasn't human. Near midnight, Emily convulsed against the restraints. Her arms stiffened, back arched. Monitors shrieked. She was seizing. They pushed sedatives into her veins. Her jaw slackened, drool spilling onto the pillow. She muttered through the breathing tube, "Don't let them in." The words were barely audible, but when Megan heard them later, she broke down crying. She used to say that as a joke when we watched horror movies. Don't let them in. But hearing it in a hospital bed, like she knew something was inside her, eating her alive. Every organ was failing. The girl who had been dancing hours ago now lay motionless, invaded by something unseen. Spinal fluid was clear, no meningitis. Toxicology was negative. Blood tests showed organs shutting down one by one. Doctors began to whisper something terrifying. Toxic shock syndrome. Rare, almost forgotten, but the clues were there. Rapid collapse, rash like sunburn, shock resistant to fluids, multi-organ involvement. Still, one question remained. If it was toxic shock, what was the source? At 3 in the morning, an attending physician asked a question that silenced the room. Has anyone done a complete pelvic exam? When they finally did, the truth revealed itself. Inside her body, unnoticed and unmentioned, was a forgotten tampon. Soaked, saturated, left in place far too long. a perfect breeding ground for Staphylococcus aureus, bacteria capable of releasing toxins that shut down organs in hours. The nightmare had begun with something so ordinary, so overlooked. For Emily, the discovery came too late. Her blood pressure was nearly absent, her body drowning in toxins. At dawn, her heart stopped again. They shocked her once, twice, 3 times. Her body jerked. The monitor screamed, then flatlined. Code was called. Compressions thundered against her chest. Syringes of epinephrine slammed into her veins. For 30 minutes, they fought. For 30 minutes, death held her tight. And then, against all odds, a pulse flickered back. Emily Hartman was alive. Barely. But the nightmare was far from over. The ICU became Emily Hartman's battlefield. Machines hissed and beeped, forcing her body to keep going when every organ wanted to quit. She was alive only because wires and tubes commanded her to be. To the doctors and nurses at her side, it felt like watching a candle tremble in a draft, its flame shrinking smaller with every minute. Her skin began to peel in thin sheets, like she had been scalded. Nurses wrapped her in sterile dressings, their gloved hands trembling. One of them whispered later, it was like her body was dissolving. By morning, her parents had arrived. The moment her mother entered the room, she collapsed at the sight. Tubes everywhere, her daughter bloated, unrecognizable. She pressed her forehead to Emily's hand, sobbing, asking what she had done wrong. Her father stood still, jaw clenched, a single tear sliding down his cheek. Only yesterday she had been alive, laughing, making plans. And now the doctors were telling them she might not live another 12 hours. Megan, still in her clothes from the party, gave her account again and again to the doctors and to police. She couldn't understand how this could happen in a single night. It had to be poison, she said, or something supernatural. Otherwise, it was just too unfair. Emily's kidneys failed completely. Dialysis was started, her blood drawn out of her body and run through a machine, then pumped back in. Her blood pressure fell lower. Drugs were poured into her veins, trying to squeeze life back into her system. Her heart hammered at 160 beats per minute, racing toward exhaustion. Despite sedation, she slipped in and out of awareness. At times she thrashed violently, eyes half open, mumbling nonsense. Once, she stared at the ceiling, her voice ragged through the breathing tube, and screamed, "They're burning me from the inside." Nurses froze. One crossed herself. Another whispered it was just the fever. But the words lingered like a curse. At 11 in the morning, her heart stopped. The room exploded into action. Compressions slammed against her chest, ribs straining under the pressure. Syringes emptied one after another. For 15 long minutes, the monitor stayed flat. At last, a weak rhythm flickered back. But many in the room wondered if her brain had survived the blackout. Infectious disease specialists confirmed what the ICU team had already suspected. Toxic shock syndrome. The tampon was the source, Staphylococcus aureus the culprit. A toxin so powerful it could tear a young, healthy body to pieces in less than a day. One doctor said quietly, "It's rare, but when it strikes, it's devastating. It's like watching the body set fire to itself." By late afternoon, she was more machine than human. The ventilator forced her lungs to rise and fall. A dialysis machine filtered her blood. Infusion pumps pushed drugs into her collapsed veins. Monitors screamed at every dip in her pressure. At 8 that evening, her heart stopped again. This time compressions lasted 23 minutes. Some doctors were ready to stop. Her parents begged, crying, "Please don't give up on her." Against the odds, her heart returned. But her body was ruined. Every organ in failure. Her skin raw and blistered. Her blood leaking through fragile vessels. Her brain swollen. The line between life and death blurred, until it was no longer clear which side she belonged to. For those in that room, the image would never fade. A young woman reduced to a shell in less than 24 hours. All because of something so small, so ordinary, so overlooked. The ICU at St. Luke's never truly slept. But that night the ward seemed to hold its breath. Nurses spoke in hushed tones. as though a raised voice might be enough to shatter the thin thread keeping Emily alive. Every hour brought a new crisis. Every hour the monitors erupted into alarms. Every hour someone asked quietly the same question. How is she still here? Her body looked less like that of a young woman and more like wreckage. Her skin peeled away in sheets, for lines were driven deep into central veins because the smaller ones had collapsed. Her fingers were swollen, her nails blue. Machines pressed drugs into her bloodstream, keeping her heart beating, keeping her blood vessels tight. It was survival by machinery, not by strength. Around 2 in the morning, her parents requested a priest. A chaplain came to the ICU, whispering prayers as her mother clutched her hand and sobbed. Some of the nurses avoided his eyes. To them, the priest's presence felt like the closing of a chapter, the sign that the end was near. But then something shifted. Her blood pressure, though still critically low, held steady. Her oxygen rose slightly. Her skin, which had been the color of ash, took on the faintest flush of pink. It wasn't a victory, but it was enough to spark disbelief. One nurse swore she saw Emily open her eyes for a second. Just a flicker, but real. Her lips moved, barely forming a word. Her mother insisted later that the word was Mom. That was the moment hope returned, fragile but alive. By sunrise, Emily had done what no one expected. She had survived the first 24 hours. But the doctors warned her family this was not a recovery, only a pause. The damage to her organs was catastrophic. Her brain might never recover. Her kidneys were gone. Her lungs still failing. She might not survive the day. And then the fevers returned. Her body spiked to 104 again, sheets drenched in sweat. Her pressure faltered. Her skin flushed a furious red, the rash deepening as toxins still coursed through her blood. Antibiotics fought to contain it, but in toxic shock syndrome the real battle isn't the bacteria. It's the storm the toxins unleash. Her own immune system was burning her alive. Later that afternoon, her friends were allowed in for the first time. They stood frozen at her bedside, staring at the broken figure beneath bandages and tubes. Megan touched her arm and whispered, "You're still you. Please don't leave." Emily didn't move, but a single tear slid down her cheek. Doctors nearly gave up. They prepared her parents for the worst. But then her kidneys gave the first sign of life. A faint trickle of urine, golden against the clear tubing. Nurses gasped. To them, it was proof that her body hadn't fully surrendered. Hours later, her pressure rose without another drug. The peeling slowed. The fevers eased. For the first time, the ICU allowed themselves to believe she might live. By day 5, sedation was lifted. Emily opened her eyes. She scanned the room slowly, confused, lips cracked and dry. Her voice came out a whisper. "Am I dying?" Her mother clung to her hand, sobbing, "No, sweetheart, you're alive." Emily whispered back, "It hurts." Then she closed her eyes again. The words were enough. They meant her brain had survived. Her mind was still there. Against all odds, she had escaped the abyss. Emily Hartman did not walk out of the hospital for many weeks. Her muscles wasted away after so long in bed. Her skin healed, but not completely. Scars remained, patches of discolored flesh like burned paper. Her kidneys were damaged beyond full repair. For months, dialysis machines kept her alive until partial function returned. But the deepest scars weren't visible. They lived in memory. When she was strong enough to speak, she refused to talk about the first night. Only once, with her mother, she whispered, "I don't remember everything, but I remember heat, and voices, and darkness pressing on me. I thought I was already dead." Her mother told her not to think about it again. But Emily never forgot. Neither did anyone who had witnessed her collapse. The image of a young woman, vibrant and laughing one moment, rotting alive the next, stayed with them like a shadow. Doctors explained it in clear, clinical terms. Toxic shock syndrome, a rare but catastrophic reaction caused when Staphylococcus bacteria release toxins into the bloodstream. It can strike anyone, but most often it appears with a forgotten tampon, left inside too long, turning into a breeding ground for poison. Once the toxins enter the blood, the body goes to war with itself. Blood pressure collapses. Organs fail. Skin burns from the inside out. In textbooks, it is described as uncommon. In reality, it is merciless. For Emily, survival was a statistical miracle. Many do not leave the ICU. Many never speak again. Even now, years later, her case is used in medical lectures. A reminder that horror does not always come from shadows or spirits, but from something as ordinary as a small piece of cotton. A reminder that the line between life and death is thinner than anyone wants to admit. Emily lived, but the party that began with laughter and lights will never be remembered as a celebration. It will be remembered as the night youth and health betrayed their illusion, and a forgotten tampon nearly stole a life. And for anyone listening, it should be remembered as this. Toxic shock syndrome is not fiction. It is not a ghost story. It is real, can happen suddenly, can happen to anyone, and once it begins, the nightmare is almost unstoppable.